The story of the Ghost you know from Call of Duty Ghosts is a lie. The entire story told to us at the beginning of the Call of Duty Ghosts campaign by Elias Walker is a lie, and I'm going to tell you the true story of the Ghost. So for those of y'all who don't know, I am IceBurgz, your Call of Duty informant, and let's dive right into the true story of Task Force Stalker, otherwise known as the Ghost. At the beginning of the Call of Duty Ghosts campaign, we are told a story about the Ghost, about this mysterious task force by Elias Walker himself. And the story he tells us is a lie. The true Ghost story is 100 times more impressive, 100 times more detailed, and 100 times more interesting than the Cliff Notes version Elias told us. And the story told to us by the in-game official military awards document in Thomas Merrick's file, who is a member of the Ghost team, begins in 2005 in the Call of Duty Ghosts universe with the invasion of Tel Aviv. Sometime in 2005, a Middle Eastern country began an invasion of Israel, which prompted an all-out war in the Middle East, where every nation in the Middle East fought alone and fought one another. With increasing tensions and issues of sovereignty in the Middle East, the allies of these warring countries were pulled into the conflict, including the United States. This put pressure on the United States government to ensure the safety and extraction of all Americans left in the Middle East, and so the American government directed civilian and military personnel to set an extraction point at a hospital on the edge of the Iranian border in the desert. Among them, injured American civilians, dignitaries, and other Americans who were just looking to escape the growing conflict in the Middle East all converged. As a result, 60 Tier 1 operators were sent to defend the civilians as they were evacuated in Operation Sand Viper. This is part of the truth, but not the whole truth. The 5 Special Forces teams totaling 60 operators who were sent to the hospital as a combined force were the United States Marine Force Recon, the Navy SEALs, the Army Rangers Regimental Recon Team, a Delta Force team, and the 24th Special Tactics Unit from the Air Force, who were all deployed on the first day of Operation Sand Viper. In the hours before the team arrived, the Iranian military had began an attack on the hospital and actually infiltrated the building, compromising the security of civilians at the hospital. Upon arriving at the hospital, the combined special forces began room-to-room clearance of the insurgent forces to secure the facility. However, once the 60 Tier 1 operators began to clear the hospital, the Iranians withdrew and called for reinforcements. As Iranian reinforcements arrived, they combined with the retreating troops, assembling a mass of soldiers preparing for an attack just outside the secured perimeter. With the hospital secured, the teams were split into different jobs. The Navy SEALs and Marine Force Recon were assigned to patrol the sand dunes around the hospital, providing fire support and sniper support, while these other combined teams covered the main road and entrance to the facility. Now, as this first day faded into night, the Iranian military encroached on the perimeter in the cover of darkness, using their knowledge of the terrain to their advantage in order to bring in equipment. The initial signs of the battle came as Iranian mortars broke the uneasy silence. Once the heavy mortar fire began, the nearby Navy SEALs moved out of their concealed location in the sand dunes to attack the mortar positions. Meanwhile, the Marine Force Recon began working as counter-snipers as the long-range shots rang out across the battlefield from Iranian snipers. Luckily, among the Force Recon team was the best Tier 1 sniper in the world, Keegan Russ. And as the gunfire and explosions disrupted the scene, the Force Recon and Navy SEALs were able to pick off the Iranian mortar teams and sniper teams, as well as the Navy SEALs picking off a few RPG troops who were firing at the hospital from the Iranian army. The leftover combined American forces held off the frontal assault in the cover of darkness as they called in airstrikes on the front lines of the fight. Now, it is unclear, but following this, no major casualties had been sustained by the American forces to this point. As the Iranians retreated, it was clear to see the front gate and front wall of the hospital had been blown to pieces by the combined explosive ordnance of the Iranian army used just moments ago. Nonetheless, they had been fought off the first night. But this victory was short-lived, as the air support and backup troops for Operation Sand Viper were pulled off to assist other American troops within Iraq and Iran, and this left the 60 Tier 1 operators without supplies, without backup, and without the one thing the Iranians could not stop: air support. Upon receiving this news, all Tier 1 operators were ordered back to the hospital. As the night turned into day, the 60 Tier 1 operators were spread across the hospital. While few to no lives had been lost at this point, it wouldn't remain that way for long. Among the teams, the leaders of each respective squad deliberated the first defense plan of Operation Sandviper without backup. Seeing as the Iranians had attacked in the cover of darkness, it was safe to assume that they would do the same thing again. So each team donated their best long-range experts and snipers to the roof of the hospital as the rest of the Special Forces soldiers spread to cover the now destroyed front wall and the perimeter. The second day went by with few shots fired between the two sides as both prepared for the night to come, and a morning that would change everything. It was here that Thomas Merrick of the Navy SEALs on the rooftop alongside Marine sniper Keegan Russ spotted an enemy ambush coming down the road, but unable to call for backup, the Special Forces were all alone. The enemy had used the encroaching night to sneak troops closer and closer to the base until they were in range, and they set off a signal. Headlights lit up the road into the hospital as a truck came flying down the road, crashing into the front door of the hospital and detonating a suicide bomb, shaking the entire hospital in the early morning hours. As the 5 floors of the hospital at the area of impact fell down around the truck, the squads assigned to defend the front door had been killed by the explosion or by the falling debris, and the explosion signaled the attack, as the Iranian army used the massive hole in the building as a way to try to take the hospital. On the roof, all but 2 soldiers had been killed by the explosion or fallen off the roof. Petty Officer 2nd Class Thomas Merrick awakened to find everyone else dead except for a heavily injured Marine Force sniper, Sergeant Keegan Russ. In an effort to get back in the fight and keep Keegan Russ alive, Merrick threw him over his shoulders and pulled out his sidearm, rushing down 5 flights of stairs. And upon getting to the bottom floor of the stairs closest to the enemy, Merrick rushed to reconnect with the remaining Tier 1 soldiers in the fight. He cleared every room and every hallway on the back to the rest of the Tier 1 troops using only his 9mm pistol. Later on, in the official account, Keegan Russ would state, he boldly and blindly rushed round corners with no suppressing fire and bullets impacting all around him. As Thomas Merrick reached the remaining American forces who had been scattered, they banded together to make a stand against the onslaught of Iranians. The fighting ensued through the rest of the day until eventually the Iranian troops retreated. As the last of the American soldiers regrouped and accounted for survivors, they found that they numbered only 15, and we know who 9 of them are. Gabriel T. Rourke was now the impromptu leader. Among them, Elias Walker, Keegan Russ, Alex Ajax Johnson, Thomas Merrick, Ridian Grim Poe, Chris Torch Green, and a soldier codenamed Kick, a soldier codenamed Neptune, and 6 more whose names remain redacted. And throughout all of this, the Tier 1 soldiers had kept all of the civilians alive miraculously, but the civilians and the remaining American team came to the realization that they would not be able to hold off another full attack. It was at this point Thomas Merrick made sure to bandage and provide first aid to Keegan Russ, the soldier he had carried down 5 flights of stairs before Gabriel Rourke approached him, saying the 2 of them should take the opportunity to slip into the darkness remaining at the beginning of the 3rd night, in order for them to get an accurate head count on the enemy and ascertain their strength. After the remaining American soldiers approved of this covert op, Merrick and Rourke slipped into the cover of darkness, using the sandy dunes to sneak up on an enemy patrol, using only knives and hand-to-hand combat to kill the enemy in order to maintain stealth. Upon reaching the enemy's staging point, the 2 estimated roughly 500 Iranian troops remained, but they were lacking vehicles and long-range support such as artillery. It appeared both sides would be limited to small arms fire in their next engagement. Rourke and Merrick rushed back to the hospital, informing the other soldiers of the enemy's strengths and weaknesses. However, the remaining soldiers tried to establish a plan of how to keep the civilians safe and how to get them extracted. It was here that Thomas Merrick came up with a plan where 14 of the soldiers would willingly sacrifice themselves in order to delay the Iranian onslaught and allow the civilians a chance to escape. The American forces all assumed the enemy would know that they were depleted in numbers and would utilize the opportunity to kill or capture the remaining Americans in the hospital. It was determined that Merrick, who was still in good health, and the person responsible for the plan would lead the civilians away. However, first, Merrick would personally help each of the remaining troops camouflage themselves beneath the bodies and debris of the previous 2 days of fighting. The 14 were buried in camouflage, and after the last soldier had been covered, Merrick snuck the civilians out in the cover of darkness down the road opposite of the Iranian troops, towards a nearby American secured territory. The remaining 14 lied in wait, with Gabriel Rourke choosing the ambush spot they would wait in to be the crater created by the suicide bomb truck at the front entrance. And to let Elias describe what they look like,
The rest returned to the line and took up positions beneath the bodies of their fallen brothers. As they lay in wait, the blood from the dead poured over them. The sand stuck to their skin like a shroud, changing them, anointing them.
The 14 waited until the Iranians had thoroughly entered the hospital before they left the crater and their other places of hiding, before ambushing enemy soldiers, unaware of the ghostly apparitions who began picking them off. 3 days into this fight with the Iranians, no supplies had been restocked, and so every single possible bullet that could be used by the 14 was, until they ran out of ammo. Then they began to use their knives to stab and cut their way through the Iranians, lunging at them from the shadows and darkness, until eventually their knives had been used so much that they had run the blades dull. Unable to penetrate the skin of the enemy, as the blades ran dull, they switched to their hands, killing every Iranian they could find. And as the last Iranian soldier ran off into the sand dunes nearby, fleeing the carnage, he had witnessed Iranian soldiers being killed by people seemingly appearing out of the darkness and then disappearing once again. After Thomas Merrick ensured civilian safety, he would return to the site with US reinforcements to find all 14 soldiers had survived the battle. Following this, the US government would create a new task force for these 15 soldiers to operate at the highest level. The official designation, Task Force Stalker. As the team was being formed, the fleeing Iranian soldier had been found wandering the desert, describing these ghosts who had appeared from nowhere, killing his comrades. Fellow Iranians discovered the aftermath of the hospital and confirmed this story, but it was too late. Throughout the Middle East, the story of these soldiers who had appeared from nowhere to attack like ghosts spread like wildfire, prompting the unofficial name of Task Force Stalker to be designated as the Ghost.